ordinary people. Now, the royal center lies to the southwestern part of the capital. It has more than 60 shrines, right? And this perhaps indicates royal support to cults as a way of legitimizing their rule. One, gaining the support of the people, and two, to legitimize their rules that see all these gods and goddesses are actually supporting our rule. There are 30 buildings which have been classified as palaces. The temples are entirely built of masonry, and the superstructure of the secular buildings classified as palaces were made of perishable materials, except a few. So you would have a masonry base on which you would raise wooden posts and use thatch roofs and walls. Some of the most interesting structures within the royal enclosure or the royal center is the Mahanavmi Dibba. In fact, there's not one such platform but two. So the largest enclosure in the royal center is called palace, but we have no conclusive proof that whether this was used as the royal family's residence. The entire enclosure is surrounded by high double walls, and they're really high. There are two impressive platforms. One is called the audience hall and the other is called the Mahanavmi Dibba. Now, the audience hall is not as high or as large as the Mahanavmi Dibba. And when we look at the top of the platform, there are slots of wooden pillars. We've also found stairs going up to the second floor, and most likely the second floor must have rested on the wooden pillars. Today, of course, the wooden pillars and the second floor do not exist. Now, when we look at the pillars in the audience hall, we see that they are placed very close to each other, and it would really obstruct the view. So, the audience sitting in the hall would not have a clear view of the king, and the king also would not have a clear view of the people there. So, historians have questioned today whether we can still call it the audience hall. Then, of course, we have what is called the Mahanavmi Dibba. It's a massive platform. The base is about 11,000 square feet. It's a height of 40 feet, and there is evidence that it supported a wooden superstructure as well. The base of the platform is covered with relief carvings of animals, war scenes, and so on. Now, the question is, why was this Mahanavmi Dibba built? What was its purpose? So, some historians have argued that maybe they were used for rituals associated with Mahanavmi during the 10-day Dashera festival. We know that Vijayanagar has a long tradition of celebrating the Dashera festival, which is known by different names around the country. The Navratras in North India, Durga Puja in Eastern India. And this festival was used to display the Raya's prestige, power, and suzerainty. Perhaps they worship the image of the goddess and the state horse. Maybe they sacrifice buffaloes and other animals. Perhaps dances and wrestling matches were conducted. Maybe in front of the Mahanavmi Dibba there were processions of caparisoned horses, elephants, and chariots and soldiers. Maybe there were ritual presentations before the king and his guests by the chief Nayakas and the subordinate kings. Now, on the last day of the festival, the king may have inspected his army and the armies of the Nayakas in a grand ceremony in an open field. On this occasion, the Nayakas perhaps brought in rich gifts for the king as well as the stipulated tribute. Please note how I'm saying perhaps and maybe, because some historians have argued that the space around the Mahanavmi Dibba may not have allowed for such grand displays. So, again, at best, we can only make some informed guesses, but largely the Mahanavmi Dibba remains enigmatic. There were many other beautiful buildings in the royal center. One is the Lotus Mahal. We don't really know what it was used for. It's really a gallery with a top story. Colin Mackenzie suggested that this may have been used as a chamber for the council where the king would meet his advisors. And then you also have the Hazar Ram temple. So, why was it called Hazar Ram? It's really been called Hazar Ram by the archaeologists who discovered it, largely perhaps because the walls of the temples actually recount the story of the Ramayana. Now, let's come to the sacred center. Now, why would the rulers of Vijayanagar choose Hampi as their capital? Now, traditionally, this area has been known to be contiguous with the monkey kingdom of Vali and Sugri from the Ramayana. Traditions tell us that Pampa Devi performed many penances in this region to marry Virupaksha, who is seen as a form of Shiva, who's the protector of the kingdom. We also have a lot of Jain temples in the vicinity. So this seems to have been, associated. The site seems to have been associated with a lot of different traditions, and perhaps that is one of the reasons why the Vijayanagar kings chose this as their capital. Now, temple building was a very, very important tradition, and the kings associated themselves through temple building with divinity and gaining legitimacy for their rule. The temples, in turn, would also receive huge land grants from the kings and eventually developed as significant religious, social, cultural, and economic centers. Vijayanagar kings claimed to rule on the behalf of the god Virupaksha, and all royal orders were signed Sri Virupaksha. And the title of Hindu Suratrana or Hindu Sultan was also used by quite a few of the kings. When the king visited the temple, it was supposed to be a special state occasion. So processions were organized and gifts were given away, and you have inscriptions which record the event. We have something called the Raya Gopuram. These were the royal gateways. So these were new gateways added by the Vijayanagar kingdoms to perhaps pre-existing temples, because often you see that the gateways are higher than the temple itself. Very, very richly decorated gateways. Now, why would they build such high gateways? Perhaps to announce the presence of a temple from a distance. So, as people were coming in from far away, they could figure out that there was this large temple situated ahead. There were mandapas or pavilions and long pillared corridors that often ran around the shrines within the temple complex. So, around the outer wall, they would have, galleries and halls and so on. Perhaps for the devotees coming and resting there, or maybe to perform different rituals. When we look at the Virupaksha temple, we have a hall in front of the main shrine, which was built by Krishna Deva Raya to mark his ascension to the throne. He also is supposed to have built the eastern gateway, which is the main gateway through which we enter into the temple even today. The mandapas were used for many things, such as marriages of the gods, performances of dance and music as offerings to the god. Vithala temple. So, Vithala is a form of Vishnu, and this is the main Vithala temple, and you can see mandapas not only in front of the temple but also on either side. And right in front of the Vithala temple, you also have a shrine in the shape of a chariot. And here you can see some of the granite hills in the background. This largely encircles the entire capital of Hampi. Now, when archaeologists are excavating, how do they plot palaces, temples, and bazaars and start their excavation process? So, in 1976, Hampi was recognized as a site of national importance. It is today a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And we have a lot of photographs, old plans, elevation of structures and sculptures, and also foreign travelers' accounts to understand this site. But to understand the layout, the first step that the archaeologists do is to divide the entire area into a set of 25 squares. So 5 by 5 squares each, and each square is designated by the letter of the alphabet A to Z, except for I. I is not used. Each of then these squares, which they've been numbered A, B, C, D, and so on, are further subdivided into sets of even smaller squares. And again, the same. So you will have the smaller squares being called AA, AB, AC, AD, and so on. And each of these smaller squares could be further subdivided into yet smaller units. And these were used to map out roads, bazaars, temples, etc., to further excavate. Now, some of the early archaeologists here, John M. Fritz, George Michel, and M.S. Nagaraj Rao, after they excavated this region, they said that in our study of these monuments of Vijayanagar, we have to imagine a whole series of vanished wooden elements, columns, brackets, beams, ceilings, overhanging eaves, and the towers, decorated with plaster and painted perhaps brightly. Something that you see in temples even today. So maybe that tradition is an old one. Now, questions need to be asked to get some answers. Now, when buildings survive, they tell us about the way the space was organized and used, how they were built, what materials were used, what technology was used to build these structures. These structures also hint at the spread of ideas and cultural influences. Like, for example, when we were talking about the gateways through each of the layers of the walls of the Hampi, the gateways were built in a more Indo Islamic format with arches and domes. Often, to understand purposes of buildings or the decorations of buildings, we need to combine information from other sources like literature, inscriptions, and popular traditions, like we saw in chapter 4. Now, some questions to ask are these. Now, would commoners have had access to any of these areas within the royal center or the sacred center? Could they freely come and go, or was access limited? Would they hurry past the sculpture or the architecture, or would they pause to see and reflect and try to understand its complicated symbolism? And what are the people who worked on these colossal constructions think of the enterprises to which they had contributed the labor? So, the masons, the architects, what did they think about what they had created? So, these are some of the key questions which we need to ask and need to find the answers to. I hope today's session has been helpful. I'll be posting the next chapter very soon. So be alert and all the best.